then we can see that the role of speed is very important and is becoming even more important in junior tennis. Before we could say that, well, speed, fast shots, fast strokes in the performance tennis, in the professional tennis. But nowadays, it comes even to the junior tennis. And then you can see some very junior players, like 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old players play very fast strokes. So let's see what are some key principles or key mechanics how a tennis player can develop faster racket speed. When we talk about speed, this sport is very general. We have different types of speed. Let's speak specifically about the racket speed. Speed, we have the speed of movement. When a player runs fast, slow, we are talking about the player's speed of movement. We have the speed of reaction. So the speed we have different types of speed, but we are going to focus specifically on the racket speed. There are several features, several elements contributing to a player's racket speed. We are going to mention and explain 5 of these various elements. So several elements contribute to increasing racket speed. Use of elastic energy, racket displacement, coordinated movement, muscle strength and power, and heaviness of a stroke. And then through this presentation, in 10-15 minutes, we're going to go through these 5 elements. Use of elastic energy as the first element contributing on the racket speed. What are the key terms under the use of elastic energy? What are the key terms? There are some key terminologies that as a tennis coach would be important to know and would be important to be familiar with the meaning, etc., etc. The first important terminology, stretch, shorten, cycle. Stretch, shorten, cycle, in order to explain it with an example, when a player bends his knees or goes for a split step, the player stretches and then shortens a group of muscles. When you take the racket back, you stretch and then shorten a group of muscles. And this cycle is being repeated all over your strokes. So stretch, shorten cycle is one of the key elements contributing towards this increase of the speed. And as you can see on the screen, 10 to 20% additional racket speed would come up following this stretch, shorten cycle. But one important one important fact coming from this research is that this stretching the muscle fibers and shortening the muscle fibers, this cycle has to happen very fast. If you have a long delay between this stretch and the shorten, you're going to lose this stored energy. So as you can see on the screen, if a player taking his racket back, if the pause at the end of the backswing, before he goes for the forward swing and hitting the ball, if the delay is a long one, if it is more than 1 second, 50% or even more than 50% of this stored energy is lost. So this is something that we have to look at the player and make sure that this pause is not a long one. But we have to admit that this pause is there. We cannot expect a junior player to play a forehand without a pause. So the delay is there. And the reason that player goes for this delay or has this pause, we have another element, coordination or harmony of the stroke. So we cannot expect a player to play a forehand without a pause. But remember, this pause, the duration of this pause should be acceptable, not very long. And junior players, physically, in terms of muscle, can benefit from faster racket head speed. Next key terminology, separation angle. When a player turns his body, I think this information I have collected from the resources on my presentation. I just try to put on every slide, I just try to put not so much of details, but some key facts that you can use even practically in your lessons. Separation angle. When a player turns his body to play, let's say, a forehand, this movement starts from the hip. So the player turns his hips, but at the point he stops turning his hips. So the hips are fixed, and then his shoulder goes more than this turn of the shoulder goes more than the hips. And this angle between the hips, so hips, you as a player, you turn your hip, you align your hips, and then the shoulder goes more than the hips. So this difference of angle, we call it separation angle. So as a player, you need to make sure that you are using you are having enough and appropriate separation angle in order to benefit from the previous one, the stretch, shorten cycle. Two examples. In a one-handed backhand, the separation angle, in a one-handed backhand, when the player turns and aligns the hip, and then goes for further shoulder turn, this angle of separation between the hips and the shoulders is around 30 degrees. And you can see on the two-handed backhand is less. And that's because the player is taking the racket back with two hands. But remember, we cannot be, without observation, without tools, without fast cameras, without assessment tools, we cannot be that exact. So we should accept some sort of range. You are familiar, most of you attended our level 1, level 2 courses, and you are familiar with this term, range of acceptability. So for all this stuff, there is an acceptable range, even for the data to come. Second element, racket displacement, or the distance that the racket moves and travels before hitting the ball. We need this racket placement. You know, that's a simple thing. You take your racket back and then move it forward to play the ball. But what are the reasons? For what reason is behind it? Why the player takes the racket back? What is this racket displacement for? This is a question. To generate power? Well, this is one of the reasons we are talking about the racket displacement. Faster racket movement.
To develop momentum.
Right angle. We are all familiar with this subject because on the court, that's what we do on a daily basis. We are working on the players, we encourage the appropriate backswing, just to make sure that we know why, scientifically, why we do that. So one reason behind this racket displacement is to overcome the swing weight of the racket. So your racket has some weight, and then you need to overcome this weight at the point of contact. And then for this, you need some distance from the point of contact. And the next, and the very important reason is to develop momentum. So to play a fast shot, you need momentum. You need enough amount of momentum, which is mass into velocity. So mass goes to the heaviness of your racket, and the velocity goes to the speed of your racket when touches the ball at the point of contact. Again, some interesting data. How far racket back on a forehand and on the backhand, on the forehand and on the backhand side, in order to have an effective, fast movement of his racket. So as you can see on the screen, one-handed backhand, at the end of his backswing or her backswing, the player can take the racket. If I'm facing my opponent, the other player on the other side of the net, I'm taking my racket up to 260 degrees. This is the maximum range of acceptability. It doesn't mean that we expect a junior player to take his racket in a, let's say, in a one-handed backhand that far. It's good to know that at the end, when he goes to professional tennis, this is the acceptable range. Two-handed backhand. Again, if I'm facing my opponent, racket displacement could be up to 200 degrees. So if we take this line, 180, usually professional players, they will take the racket somehow further than this line. So we can see one-handed backhand is further back, two-handed backhand is a little bit more forward. It's less than the one-handed backhand. And forehand is 225, or let's say 45, around 45 degrees from this line, facing the other player. Using coordinated movements, what are the key terms? Coordinated movement. What is the second one? Simultaneous movement. Let's see what they mean. What's the meaning of a coordinated movement and then simultaneous movement? Coordinated movement, as the name shows, it means some body segments, some sequences, they come one after each other. Some examples. In an advanced forehand, at the end of backswing, and then beginning of your forward swing, which body segment starts turning first? Let's say I'm turning my racket back, I'm taking my racket back, I'm at the end of the backswing, I'm going to start my forward swing. My racket can move forward, my shoulder can move forward, trunk, hip, or they can move forward all at the same time. So what do you see in the forehand of a professional player? Does he move all these body segments at the same time, or moves the body segments one after each other, or let's say in a sequence?
And when you are down to.
I think we all come to this answer that body segments, they don't go at the same time. So if we turn, let's say, if I move my racket, if I move my trunk, if I move my hip all at the same time, that's the second one. But this is not what we see in advanced strokes. So if I move the segments, I'm going for the second one, simultaneous movement. But if I start moving my hip, trunk, and then my racket, I'm using the first one. Hey, you know the meaning of coordinated movement and simultaneous movement. That's interesting. We can categorize the tennis strokes: power strokes, precision strokes. So we can more or less say these baseline rally strokes, forehands, backhands, in the professional game they are power strokes. Which other strokes we can put in the category of precision? Which strokes we can call them more or less precision strokes? Police? Less power comparing to forehand, backhand, less power and more precision. So as we see on the screen, in the power strokes, more number of segments are involved, whereas in the precision strokes, this number is less. Again, some interesting facts. High-speed stroking requires a coordinated sequence of movement. The motion of segments is generated sequenced, usually, proximal to distal. Proximal to distal, from big to a small, from legs to a smaller segments. But this is not always. There are some exceptions. Let me give you an example. In general, what we know and what we teach and what we observe on our players, they go from legs to the trunk, to the shoulder, to the hand, to the racket, but proximal to distal. But what are the exceptions? One exception in serve is that, for instance, when you start moving the racket to the ball, this internal rotation of your upper arm and this internal external rotation of your forearm, which one starts first? Which one happens first? This or this?
This movement. This one first.
So, one or two? Which one happens first?
One.
This movement starts with this and then this.
One, then two.
Right? We start with this and this. Okay, if we consider this as proximal and this one as distal, then this is not the order, proximal to distal. That's the opposite. It's from, we start with the small, then we go to the bigger one. Small, big. So this is the exception that we have. So this proximal legs to trunk and then to smaller segments, it doesn't happen. It doesn't happen always. We have exceptions. I gave you an example. Role of muscle, strength, and power. What are the key terms? As on the screen, but this is not something we all coaches know, and we are all aware of the importance of a specific exercise for tennis players. So, shoulder region. To be a successful tennis player, we need a strong shoulder, strong and flexible. That's important to have strong and at the same time flexible shoulder. Muscle power. The muscle power needed on the shoulder, that's called a rotation, fast rotation of your shoulder. But at the same time, the shoulder needs enough strength, and this strength is for the stabilization of this movement. So if your shoulder has enough power, moves fast, but the strength is not enough, then this movement cannot be stable, cannot happen all over the time. And then the other risk is there, injury. That's why it's important to make sure that you train your players, or the physical conditioning coach trains the player under some eccentric contraction. What does it mean, eccentric contraction? We have two types of muscle contractions, concentric and eccentric. So if I move my hand up, these muscles, my biceps, are doing concentric contraction. And then taking my hand down, the bicep muscles are contracting eccentrically. So in tennis, that's important to make sure that you train the muscles concentrically, but more importantly, eccentrically, in order to make sure that the player's muscles have enough potential and capability to prevent injury. When you play a forehand, when I play a forehand, on the forward swing, and then swing and the follow through, my back muscles are eccentrically concentrated. So they are moved and at the same time concentrated. So I need to have strong back muscles. And the fifth one, heaviness of a stroke. What does it mean? What is a heavy stroke? What is your answer to this question? What is a heavy stroke? What are the elements? Let's say, what are the elements of a heavy stroke? More rotation, more speed, and at the same time, so a heavy stroke is a combination of spin and speed. So that's an interesting word. A heavy stroke is not all about hitting the ball fast. Hitting the ball fast and at the same time combining this speed with the speed. Research shows that flat serve of college players has a spin rate of 774 rotations per minute. So what does it mean? You're talking about flat serve of players, but we can see that this flat serve has a lot of rotation. And the next one says flat serve of professional players goes with a speed of 1,600 rotations per minute. So comparing them, we come to this conclusion that even flat serve, they are not flat. A flat serve goes with some amount of speed. Some data we're gonna use the data on when we work with with the junior players. Forward trajectory in ground strokes until before impact. Again, some data you can use for your observation. Flat strokes. This is that's for the ground strokes, forehands and backhands. So flat strokes. The racket trajectory before hitting the ball is somewhere between 25-30 degrees. So this angle, that's the racket angle before hitting a flat forehand or a flat backhand. The second one, that's the range for a topspin shot, for a topspin forehand or for a topspin backhand. And the third one is the acceptable range for a lob, for a forehand lob and a backhand lob. Before we start working with players, let's talk a little bit about qualitative analysis and quantitative analysis. Yesterday, Rian explained diagnosis and correction versus analysis and improvement. So diagnosis and correction versus analysis and improvement. We are familiar with those stuff. Quantitative analysis. In quantitative analysis, we are dealing with figures. We are dealing with the data we get from the research. And in qualitative analysis, that's what we usually do on our daily lessons, working with players. That's our observation of players. That's what we do in our lessons. And this cycle, observing, evaluating, and improving a player, this cycle happens all over the time. Preparation, then we get ready, we get the appropriate equipment. On court, player is not tired, is ready for the session, is ready for our observation. Then observation, we observe the player from different angles. We observe the player in a real situation. We observe the player in match situation, in practice situation. We observe the player using teaching aids. We use camera to observe the player. Evaluation and diagnosis, this is our job. And then intervention. So after completing these 3 elements, we go to intervention. We start developing something. So I would like to invite these 2 junior players, 2 boys, are waiting to come and play a few shots. So let's give a clap to Ali and Nasser. So we give them 2 minutes. While I'm explaining the other slide, we give them 2 minutes to do a little bit warm-up. You can start warming up. 2 minutes. You can play. You play half-time. So I've tried to summarize this presentation on this last slide. On the screen, we have 4 questions. After they do their warm-up, we are going to put them in a situation that they play some forehands for us, and we are going to observe and evaluate their strokes. I'm going to give you 4 cues for observation. Let's look at the screen. The first one, using a stretch shorten cycle with a brief pause. For the first one, we are going to observe the pause at the end of the backswing. Let's evaluate. So when we are referring to using a stretch shorten cycle, let's evaluate how much is the delay, how much is the pause at the end of their backswing. That's what we are going to look at. For the second one, racket displacement with power strokes, we're going to put them in a situation. And we are going to evaluate the racket displacement on forehand. And the third one, using coordinated movement. What to look at for the coordinated movement? We look at the movement of the back hip, followed by the shoulder and the racket. This is what we are going to observe. And the fourth one, heaviness of the stroke. Let's see how they combine the spin and the split into their strokes. Are you ready, Nasser? Let's move to this side, and we'll start with few forehands. What I want them to do is to start from the middle, and each player will play 10 shots. So they will play 1, back to the middle, 2, back to the middle, 3, 4, and then 1, the deep one, which is for them to play a lot. And then they are going to repeat it twice. So 5, all to the middle, followed by another 5. And what I would like you to do is to observe the forehands and with the cues that I've given to you, and then we're going to change, we're going to observe the other player, and we are going to talk about these 4 cues that you already observed. You ready? Ready? Start with you. You're in the middle. Here we go. 1, back to the middle. Come on. Then faster, back to the middle. You go for a top spin, back to the middle. Faster, that's where you play less spin, and you go back to play a lot. 5 more tries. Let's do 5 more tries. You go for a top spin, back to the middle, forward, play it there, back. 1 more try, back to the middle, back, and that's for you to play a lot. Okay, now let's review this forehand. In your opinion, which of these four cues was his strength? Was he good in this end of backswing, having a short delay at the end of his backswing? Racket displacement, did he have enough racket displacement on the forehand, on a power shot, on a power forehand? Did he use this coordinated movement of turning his hip and then the trunk and the racket? And the fourth one, combination of speed and speed. Which one was, in your opinion, which one was his strength? Please. Can you speak a little louder? The first one, straight shorten cycle. So this means he didn't have a long pause at the end of the backswing. Any other comments? We are talking about the player's strength. Number 3, coordinated movement. So you mean for the coordinated movement, we agreed to look at the rotation of hip followed by the upper body. Any other comments? Okay, let's talk about. So we started with the player's strength. We didn't go to the player's weakness. Now let's mention which one you think needs more work.
Number 5.
We don't have number 5. This trunk is red. Number 4 you mean? Because this red column is for serve, so we just leave it aside. We have 1, 2, 3, 4. So amongst 4, which one needs more work? Fourth one. Trajectory. Number 1. Can you mention the weakness, or let's say the area he needs to improve more? Right. This pulse should be limitless. Okay. Who agrees that the first one is his weakness, or let's say the main weakness? Can you raise your hands quickly? So let's see which one we're gonna work. Number 1. Second one. Third one. And the fourth one. Others no opinion? Okay. Let's go for the other player. So we skip working on the weakness. Let's observe the other player. But this time, I want you to tell us exactly which cue we're gonna work on. So out of these 4 cues. So better observation. We start with Nasser. Nasser, you ready? 1. Back to the middle. Forward. Back. 3. That's your topspin shot. Back to the middle. Up there. And then 1 deep shot to play a lob. 5 more. Let's say 5 more shots.